Hello, everybody. I put out a notice on a bunch of different social media that I might try doing a Bible study again, and so that's what I'm doing now. Um, I've had kind of a crazy 3 months and haven't been able to get a haircut, and it's freezing cold here in my office and stuff. So, pardon me if I don't look real professional. And also, so we're going to read Ezekiel 23. This just happens to be where I am. I started reading this and I got a significant part of the way through it, and I had some thoughts about what it might mean this day and age, and so I'd love to share that with you. Um, but this is pretty explicit, this part of the Bible, and I don't know if I've ever heard a Bible study on it, but people don't know that this kind of stuff is in here, and so originally when I did my Bible study, the idea was that people just don't know what's in the Bible, and it's true. People don't read it. It's too difficult to hold the whole book in your mind. But back in the day, in the 1500s, when the Protestant Reformation happened, the standard was that the people who would argue about the Bible would would have it memorized in Latin backwards. So the comprehension that people have of this book nowadays is just pathetic, and people need to have much more humility. But with humility, God can help us learn some things. So we're going to read this, but like I said, it's a little bit explicit. And the word of the Lord came to me, saying, Son of man, there were two women, daughters of one mother, and they committed fornication in Egypt. By the way, I don't know what the audio is like. Hopefully it's fine. Feel free to let me know. Um, feel free to let me know because if it's not fine. Since I can see there's people watching. Good. There were two women, daughters of one mother, and they committed fornication in Egypt. In their youth they committed fornication. There were their breasts pressed down, and the teats of their virginity were bruised. Their names were Ulla the elder, and Ulaba her younger sister, which is a reference to the temple, which it explains there. One means that you pick your own habitation, Ula. Ulaba means that he makes his habitation. He's talking about the temple because Samaria, the upper kingdom, would worship wherever they wanted. They would worship the true God, but they worship him wherever they wanted. And so I think historically all of the churches that have split off from the Catholic Church, you can understand is signified pretty easily by the northern kingdom of Israel. That's kind of a lot of times how I understand it, as far as like trying to explain it this day and age. Anyways, and I took them, and they bore sons and daughters. Now for their names, Samaria is Ula, and Jerusalem is Ulaba. And Ula committed fornication against me, and doted on her lovers, on the Assyrians that came to her, who were clothed with blue, princes and rulers, beautiful youths, all horsemen, mounted upon horses. And she committed fornication with these chosen men, all sons of the Assyrians, and she defiled herself with the uncleanness of all them on whom she doted. Moreover, also she did not forsake her fornications which she had committed in Egypt, for they also lay with her in her youth, and they bruised the breasts of her virginity, and poured out their fornication upon her. Therefore have I delivered her into the hands of her lovers, and into the hands of the sons of the Assyrians, upon whose lust she doted. They discovered her disgrace, took away her sons and daughters, slew her with the sword. They became infamous women, and they executed judgments in her. I believe that means that her daughters became prostitutes. Which, by the way, I've been talking about Muslims a lot lately. I've been talking to Muslims a lot lately. And historically speaking, what happens anytime Islam prospers, it's because Christendom has turned the Christians have turned their own sons into slaves and their own daughters into prostitutes. That's why Islam comes up, because Islam has solutions for those problems. And when her sister Ulaba saw this, she was mad with lust more than she. She carried her fornication beyond the fornication of her sister, impudently prostituting herself to the children of the Assyrians, the princes and rulers that came to her, clothed with diverse colors, to the horsemen that rode upon horses, and to young men all of great beauty. And I saw that she was defiled, and that they both took one way. And she increased her fornications. And when she had seen men painted on the walls, the images of the Chaldeans set forth in colors, and girded with girdles about their reins, and with dyed turbans on their heads, the resemblance of all the captains, the likeness of all the sons of Babylon and of the land of the Chaldeans wherein they were born. She doted upon them with the lust of her eyes, and she sent messengers to them into Chaldea. And when the sons of Babylon were come to her to the bed of love, they defiled her with their fornications, and she was polluted by them, and her soul was glutted with them. And she discovered her fornications, and discovered her disgrace. And my soul was alienated from her as my soul was alienated from her sister. So, like I said, now this is talking about the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Jerusalem. And I feel like most people in America who care about the Bible understand biblical history. I compare those two to the Catholic Church and then all the other churches, especially the Protestant churches. So what this is saying is that the northern kingdom, which wanted to worship God wherever it felt fit and didn't want to be tied to one central temple or one authority place, which you can understand. So I'll just say, so the Protestant churches worship God wherever, and whereas Catholic Church worshiped God with a clear signification in Rome. Basically, when the Protestant churches split off, they then got seduced by humanism, liberalism, reason, and all these things that have come through history. What the Bible is saying is that then the Catholic Church saw this and did it even more. And this has been a point that I've been trying to make to my fellow Catholics for a long while, which is that they're hypocritical when they accuse people outside the church of sin, because the sins of the people currently in the Catholic Church are much worse. And this is basically what happened. So just in this narrative here, the one prostitute, the redeemed prostitute, that's how God describes the church, is bad and gets killed for it. Gives herself over to lust, just becomes a slut, and God kills her. That's what he does to the northern kingdom of Israel. And Hilaire Belloc said, when he was writing about the great heresies, he said that the Protestant heresy is dead. It's been replaced by materialism. Fair enough. Then, and that's true. A lot of people have said that, especially outside of America. America's kind of a place where it still has some strength. The Catholic Church, so then the other sister does even worse. Her sister, Ula, is discovered. She's turned out naked by the people that the false gods that she turned in with. Ulaba does it to herself. She exposes herself, so she does way worse. Ula has lovers come to her, and she's seduced by them. Ulaba calls them to her and asks them to come and do that. Anyways, I'm good. I'm glad to see you, Mr. Ethics. Good to see you again. This is a very strange part of the Bible to read with you, my friend. But I'll keep going. For she multiplied her fornications, remembering the days of her youth in which she played the harlot in the land of Egypt. And she was mad with lust after lying with them whose flesh is the flesh of asses, and whose issue is the issue of horses. And thou hast renewed the wickedness of thy youth, when thy breasts were pressed in Egypt, and the paps of thy virginity broken. Therefore, and by the way, this is coincidence. I'm reading the Bible. I started in Genesis 1. I'm in Ezekiel 23. This just happens to be the chapter where I've decided to do a Bible study. So I didn't say to myself, this is the right one to start with. This is where I happen to be. And I think God's trying to say something. And thou hast renewed the wickedness of thy youth, when thy breasts were pressed in Egypt. Therefore, Ulabah, thus saith the Lord God, Behold, I will raise up against thee all thy lovers, with whom thy soul hath been glutted, and I will gather them together against thee round about, the children of Babylon, and all the Chaldeans, the nobles and the kings, the princes, all the sons of the Assyrians, beautiful young men, all the captains and rulers, the princes of princes, and the renowned horsemen. And they shall come upon thee, well appointed, with chariot and wheel, a multitude of people. They shall be armed against thee on every side, with breastplate and buckler and helmet. And I will set judgment before them, and they shall judge thee by their judgments. And I will set my jealousy against thee, which they shall execute upon thee with fury. They shall cut off thy nose and thy ears, and what remains shall fall by the sword. They shall take thy sons and thy daughters, and thy residue shall be devoured by fire. So you can see the punishment on this sister is worse than because she committed worse sins. So she's not just turned out naked, she's cut off eyes. So basically, picture this. This is something that happens to a prostitute. People talk about old whores die bad deaths. There's nothing to look forward to in old age if your living is prostitution. Well, picture a woman that, she's doing prostitution and she's got all these powerful lovers and they give her all these clothes, and then she's gets too old for them. They turn her out naked, cut off her eyes and ear, her nose and ears, so she's hideous, and just turn her out into the streets. Just imagine what that would be like. And the king that this is referencing literally had his eyes gouged out and died spinning cloth in Babylon. So the punishment promised here on the church, who has watched the unfaithful nation, which I'm saying is the Protestant church, and then duplicate its actions, worse. The punishment is much worse. And this is something in prophecy that we have. We're told that we're about to suffer great punishments. And then people in the church are like, well, what we need to do is stockpile food and guns, and that's the way to do it, instead of actually turning to God. And then when they do turn to God, they do things like, they spend hours in prayer at the Mass, and they see like young families struggling with their children, and they don't help the young families. They see all these opportunities for charity and love of nature. They don't do any of them. Love of neighbor. They don't do any of them. So it's pretty pathetic when you come right down to it. No, I'm looking at these comments, Sarah. I see them. They might come in much later. There's probably some kind of delay. Yeah, I'd love to do that. I'm getting back into streaming. I might do these Bible studies, and this is what I'm doing. So yeah, I'd love to talk to you. It's good to talk to a smart man, and I took 3 months of basically establishing an income and a business, and now it seems like I need to do more streaming. So good. Anyways, let me just read the rest of this. I've already given my interpretation, so this is in the Bible. People don't know. This kind of stuff's in the Bible. And then they tell me it's about things that they've never read the Bible. That's what it comes down to. And they shall strip thee of thy garments, and take away the instruments of thy glory. And I will put an end to thy wickedness in thee, and thy fornication brought out of the land of Egypt. Neither shalt thou lift up thy eyes to them, nor remember Egypt any more. For thus saith the Lord God, Behold, I will deliver thee into the hands of them whom thou hatest, into their hands with whom thy soul hath been glutted. And they shall deal with thee in hatred, and they shall take away all thy labors, and shall let thee go naked, full of disgrace, and the disgrace of thy fornication shall be discovered, thy wickedness and thy fornications. They have done these things to thee, because thou hast played the harlot with the nations among which thou wast defiled with their idols. Thou hast walked in the way of thy sister, and I will give her cup into thy hand, thus saith the Lord God. Thou shalt drink thy sister's cup, deep and wide. Thou shalt be had in derision and scorn, which containeth very much. Thou shalt be filled with drunkenness and sorrow, with the cup of grief and sadness, with the cup of thy sister Samaria. And thou shalt drink it, and shalt drink it up even to the dregs, and thou shalt devour the fragments thereof. Thou shalt rend thy breast, because I have spoken it, saith the Lord God. Therefore thus saith the Lord God, because thou hast forgotten me, and hast cast me off behind thy back, bear thou also thy wickedness and thy fornications. I do want to say this. The best Catholics I know, still, 9 to 5, act like there is no God. And it's because economics is godless, and it has been for 400 years. When the argument was lost, and basically Newton and the English convinced everybody that it was this form of physics that was natural and you couldn't do anything about it, so they let the Irish starve and they didn't do anything about it. Before that, economics was downstream of the moral law of virtue, and it was understood as the interactions between men. So they talk about pursuing virtue, they spend hours in prayer, but they don't do anything about economics, which is where your opportunities are, basically. And they castigate. They don't even hold faithful to the Lord's Prayer, to the Pater Noster. They don't forgive debts. They act like forgiving a student his debt would be a travesty, and there's all kinds of hypocrisy. So, I mean, it's hard to explain it all. I write a lot about it. I talk a lot about it with people outside the church who understand it a lot better. But the point being, you better figure it out, because these punishments described here is what God will do. And it's insane to me that I tell people, I complain about the church being a neglected, abusive mother, which is really what it is. And I'm talking about the church militant. I'm talking about a very small portion of the church that will necessarily be replaced in one generation. Not the church triumphant, which is mostly the Blessed Virgin. That I love. The church on earth has mistreated everybody I know, has not led us correctly. And the sheep are scattered and all this kind of thing. So, and people are scandalized by that. But the thing is, you read the Bible, and God describes the church as a prostitute. I mean, this is how God's talking about the church. So, it's worth considering. And the Lord spoke to me, saying, Son of man, dost thou judge Ulah and Ulabah, and dost thou declare to them their wicked deeds? Because they have committed adultery, and blood is in there. And this is, by the way, whenever people are like, we shouldn't talk like this, all this kind of thing. This is the kind of passage that makes me think, well, I think God would be upset with me if I didn't tell the truth about what I've experienced. And this is true. And I think the reason why people outside the church hold it in derision, like God promises he'll do, is partly because these things are not dealt with honestly. They're not. And the Lord, and it's mostly economics. There was a battle. Capitalism came onto the scene again in about the 1500s, and it's pagan economics from the beginning to the end. It's based on usury. Capitalism is state-sponsored usury. That was the first problem. And the cardinals and the curia, the Roman curia, profited off of all of it and started enslaving Christendom and stealing from it all of its wealth from the poor and the widows and the average common man. And that's where it started. And that problem, there was argument. There were the mendicants, the Dominicans, and the Franciscans came about, preached. Florence had a revival. The Pope, Alexander VI, killed Savonarola, who's still, in a large way, considered a saint by the locals. And you read his life, and there's probably only a couple of things. It's really hard to say if he was or not. But he's a holy man in a lot of ways on the face of it, and he killed him. And Alexander VI, everyone knows, was one of the most unholy men. I mean, he died, and he was swollen with plague, and his tongue was swollen in his mouth. So God sent a sign who he liked and who he didn't like. And that was 500 years ago. It hasn't been addressed since. Now everyone's concerned with communism. It's like, well, communism, I saw a great thing about this, and I agree. I'm trying to write a book about it. Let's see. I really want to read this one. Jesus Christ was crucified between two thieves, capitalism and communism. Communism is the pus which forms in the body political when capitalism makes it sick. Chavez and okay, then he talks about Venezuela. But anyways. Because they have committed adultery and blood is in their hands, they have committed fornication with their idols. Moreover, also their children, whom they bore to me, they have offered them to be devoured. That's what they do. I was sold into slavery at a young age. The church told me to get a mortgage. It's wrecked my life. It's almost broken my marriage. It killed my son. That's what the church told me to do. And then with their daughters, they sell them into prostitution with NFP, sending them off to college, not guiding them. That's why there's so much fornication in the church right now. So, sons and daughters, slaves and prostitutes, harlots. Because they have committed adultery and blood is in their hands, and they have committed fornication with their idols, moreover also their children, whom they bore to me, they have offered to them to be devoured. Yea, and they have done this to me. They have polluted my sanctuary on the same day and profaned my Sabbaths. That's what they do. Think about the idols. It's like, what is America governed by? Corporations. What are corporations? Dead body. That's what the word means, corpse. And what are they named after? Demons. Nike, Amazon. These are literally demons. And what does the church advise people to do? Go and work for these corporations. That's why I say economics. That's what God's going to punish us for. That's where the problem started. It's where it's been. Everything else, abortion, everything else that offends people, gay marriage, all that, it's all downwind from economics. It's just fact, because nobody... I could talk about that. Other people have done better. And it's right. It's literally in the church. They profaned my Sabbaths. When they sacrificed their children to their idols and went into my sanctuary the same day to profane it, they did these things even in the midst of my house. They sent for men coming from afar, to whom they had sent a messenger. And behold, they came, for whom thou didst wash thyself, and didst paint thy eyes, and wast adorned with women's ornaments. That's where the church gets its money. Thou sattest on a very fine bed, and a table was decked before thee, whereupon thou didst set my incense and my ointment. And there was in her the voice of a multitude rejoicing, and to some that were brought of the multitude of men that came from the desert. They put bracelets on their hands, and beautiful crowns on their heads. And I said to her that was worn out in her adulteries, now will this woman still continue in her fornication. And they went in to her as to a harlot. So went they in unto Ulah and Ulabah, wicked women. And, picture this, and then picture the true reality, which is Epiphany, the thing that's supposed to happen. The three wise men, the kings of the earth, pagan kings, come to the church, to the Blessed Mother, bow down before her, because she holds God incarnate in her hands. That's how it's supposed to work. And that's described in the Old Testament too. Everybody comes up to Jerusalem to worship. Instead, she lowers herself as a prostitute to the world. That's what, and, read Dante. Hell is full of mitred crowns and whatnot. And I said to her that was worn out in her adulteries, now will this woman still continue in her fornication. And they went into her as to a harlot. So went they in unto Ulah and Ulabah, wicked women. They therefore are just men. These shall judge them as adulteresses are judged, and as shedders of blood are judged, because they are adulteresses, and blood is in their hands. For thus saith the Lord God, bring a multitude upon them, deliver them over to tumult and rapine, and let the people stone them with stones, and let them be stabbed with their swords. They shall kill their sons and daughters, and their houses they shall burn with fire. And I will take away wickedness out of the land, and all women shall learn not to do according to the wickedness of them. And they shall render your wickedness upon you, and you shall bear the sins of your idols, and you shall know that I am the Lord God. My expectation is that God will replace the church through converts, basically. It's the same threat God gave to the church every time it went greatly astray. The Protestant Reformation happened. You have Our Lady of Guadalupe, which converted more people and left the church. And in the Old Testament, it was continual. God said, I will raise new worshipers from the rocks. I will raise sons of Abraham and Moses from the rocks. And they did. Peter was the rock, and he totally got rid of the whole hierarchy, all the priests, and he raised up a new one. That's not to say, the incarnation It's the most significant thing that's ever happened in history. The church, the Catholic Church, will constitutionally be the same, be a pope, centered in Rome, all that will be the same. But point is, the individual people who are very presumptuous don't have a fear of these sorts of things, and God will cut them off and replace them with new people. We just had a new pope, you know. I'm not really talking about priests. I'm actually concerned with the laity because they're the ones I understand. And the sins that they commit are insane. Insane. Starting with usury. That's what I'm saying. And that's actually my hope. And that's why I go outside of the church, because I've been cast out in a lot of ways, looking for converts. So, here's our first Bible study. I don't know what to think of it, but God bless you. God bless you. I actually have to start working. Even though it's the Lord's Day in a half an hour, I'm going to start working because it's not profane labor, even though it wrecks my mind. And there is no rest available on the Lord's Day anymore because the church doesn't rule the world anymore. Corporations do. And so that's what I'm doing. And I'm bearing my share of this penance. So God bless you all. Pray for me. If you have any questions, contact me. I'm an open book. I can explain everything I just said.